Bienvenidos a TEDx Bogotá Mujeres, una celebración de ideas poderosas, una celebración de ideas transformadoras y que vale la pena difundir. Hoy nos reunimos aquí como en 300 lugares del planeta en simultánea. 70 países están viviendo ahora en un lapso de 24, 48 horas esta celebración con sus oradores y viendo lo que está ocurriendo en TED Women en Estados Unidos. Este evento lo único que espera o lo único que busca es que ustedes salgan inspirados y que realmente encuentren en las charlas que van a ver aquí elementos valiosos para su día a día. Adicional a esto, quiero darles unas recomendaciones muy importantes. Los invito a apagar sus celulares y además a evaluar muy bien cuáles son los puntos de salida de emergencia del lugar. No necesariamente vamos a tener una situación difícil aquí, pero es clave conocerlos. Quiero también proponerles que respetemos los bloques del evento. Vamos a tener espacios suficientes para poder descansar, para poder refrescarnos y por favor, pensemos en cómo no interrumpimos a los oradores que están acá. Imagínense qué ocurre cuando ustedes tienen todas las luces encima, todas las miradas encima y además saben que están conectados con una cantidad de personas que nos siguen por nuestro canal de streaming. Así que, por favor, mantengámonos en la silla hasta que los bloques de contenido se terminen. Para entender un poco mejor de qué se trata esta celebración y para saber con claridad quiénes son todas estas personas y organizaciones que hacen posible el evento, veamos de la mano de Chris Anderson cómo se construye un evento TEDx y qué es esto.
From Kenya to Colombia, from Iraq, in schools, in prisons, and in theatres. Every day, people gather at TEDx events around the world to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. Today, you are part of a global conversation about our shared future. So what is this TEDx? TEDx is an initiative of the TED Conference, a non-profit devoted to ideas worth spreading. We grant free licenses to allow TED-like events to spread globally. This event today is based on the TED Conference format and ideals, but is independently organized by your local community. So please make volunteers who worked so hard on today's event. It's their ideas, dedication, and time that made it all possible. It's they who booked all the speakers, and the views you'll hear today are, of course, those of those speakers, not necessarily of TEDs. But we hope their talks spark an exciting conversation among you. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for openness and for critical thinking, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you'll take out. And now, on with the show.
Dentro de este evento elegimos solo lo mejor y precisamente para empezar con herramientas muy potentes, para ver ideas muy poderosas, nos vamos a conectar con TED Women. Vamos a ver qué está pasando en Estados Unidos en esta celebración. Y después de esto, empezaremos a conocer las fantásticas ideas de Colombia. Empezaremos a mirar qué piensan y qué hacen los hombres y mujeres de nuestro país.
It's time.
It's time. It's about time.
It's about time.
It's about time.
It's about time.
It's about time.
It's about time to use the time you're given.
Live stress-free.
It's about time to stop saying everybody is the same.
It's about time that we stop discrimination against color.
It's time.
It's time
for effective communication.
to try and connect the dots.
It's about time that we get rid of all human hierarchies.
To break down walls that divide humanity.
It's about time we get serious about peace building and reconciliation.
It's about time.
It's about time to clean our environment.
It's about time we stop treating our oceans like a mine of infinite resources.
It's about time that education for girls in India stops being
It's about time to pay serious attention to education in developing countries.
It's about time for us to address the effects of our incarceration nation on women and children in America.
It's time to acknowledge women's role in the creation of cultures of peace in Colombia.
It's about time to believe it's possible.
To be the leaders we wish we had.
To fear far less and become fiercely fearless.
To declare independence for your own revolution.
It's about time we used platforms like TEDx Women to amplify the voices of Africa's phenomenal women.
It's about time for our first TEDx event here in Esperance.
For scientists like me to be able to take women's stage.
To have the same amount of men and women in our events.
It's about time we stop telling women what to wear, when to wear it, and how to wear it.
It's about time that women in Pakistan stop being murdered in the name of so-called honor.
Women should be able to make their own choices wherever they are in the world.
And their right and choice to live however they want, with whoever they want, be respected and protected.
It's time for men to listen and participate in the supporting of women's issues.
It's about time we destroyed the patriarchy.
It's about time for me.
For every Libyan girl to dream big.
For women to discover the greatness that's on the inside of them.
To start thinking about the well-being of future generations.
It's about time we include tomorrow's generations in today's conversations.
Good morning. I'm Pat Mitchell. And we'll let that play for just a second.
We're anxious to get started.
Yes, we are.
So exciting to feel this theater full like this.
And I am Kelly Stetzel, and it is time for TED Women.
As that opening video reminds us, time is very much a global preoccupation. In fact, we all have the same amount of it, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, but we never, ever feel like we have enough of it. To be a good listener, an attentive parent, a supportive partner, to accomplish all that we want to accomplish in the world. And maybe even time to be a TED Women.
And we are so grateful that you have chosen to spend your time here with us. And after getting to know these speakers and getting to meet so many of you all last night, we're feeling pretty confident that at the end of the next 2 days, you're going to find that it has been a worthwhile use of your time.
It's great for us every year, and you can tell we got so excited we started talking before we were introduced, because we look out here and we see so many familiar faces. There are many of you who have been with us every year at TED Women. We're grateful. And also every year we see new faces, and we want to say to you that if you're feeling just a little lost from all the activities, look for the people who have host on their badges to make sure that you get the best use of your time here. And speaking of that, last night was, I think, a pretty good use of our time. Did you have fun?
Oh, I had so much fun.
Did you have fun, those of you who were able to join us? You know, we try and offer something new every year, new features, new innovations. And this year, we brought the Global Showcase of Artisans, these amazing women entrepreneurs and designers from every part of the world to show their work and to talk to us about their social enterprises. And what I loved about what we do together when we are together like this is that we get to celebrate all the many parts of being a woman in the world and the men who love us. We love to shop. We love to purchase with purpose. We love to talk about serious and important issues. We love to think together, to be together.
We do. And one of the most remarkable things about TED Women to me is the global connectedness of this event. So right now, around the world, there are a record number of TEDx events being held that are watching this simulcast, and they have some live speakers of their own. There are 275 events happening around the world that are TEDx Women events. And they're in more than 70 countries, which is really exciting. And you saw some of the organizers in that opening video, and we're so grateful to the TEDx staff and to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for partnering with us on that video, and also with this partnering with us on this poll that I'm about to tell you about. So I'm going to ask everyone to get out their phones now, and then I'll explain what the poll is and how it works.
And
so
they're all
this
saying,
is a really
wait a
rare
minute.
occasion. This is rare. Enjoy it while it lasts, because it won't be long. So we're going to connect everybody, so those of us in the room and those of us watching at TEDx events around the world, and we're going to ask a question. We're going to do this another time in the program. This first one we're going to do before we hear from any of the speakers, so we can hear what you think. There are two ways that you can access the online question. One is through TED Connect, and you see the instructions up there if you'd like to do it that way. The second, everybody got that? Second is through the Facebook group. There are the instructions for Facebook. And this is how it looks. And so what you'll want to do is you'll just answer the first question we give, and then you'll click submit, and we will share the results with you at the end of this session. So the first question is, and we really want to capture this before the session starts, do we control time, or does time control us? So just take a moment to answer it. And then be sure your phone is absolutely switched off, no chance of ringing, tuck it safely away, because you will absolutely not be needing it, especially if you're sitting here in the theater.
And I have a feeling we'll probably answer that question somewhat differently at the end of TED Women than maybe we would answer it right now. We did reach out to the global community of TEDx organizers. It's so thrilling to us to see that number grow year after year, and to know that women and men are convening all over the world, some of them in places where women's voices are diminished or have disappeared. We love knowing that community is with us and listening to us. We asked them, what's on your mind? It wasn't a surprise to us that they came back and said time. Because this is that kind of time where it seems to be moving more rapidly than ever, and yet, for the things that we really want most, gender equality in the boardroom, the bedroom, maybe even the White House, racial and economic equality, there's so much more, even love.
So over the next few days, we will explore how time and attention shape our lives, from practical talks on work-life balance to mind-expanding talks on how we think about time itself. We'll look at time from the perspective of scientists, artists, writers, social justice activists, and leaders.
You know, it's that kind of time for all of us, a very heightened and interactive global conversation going on around the world. A conversation about race, about gender, about sexual assault, about police violence, about economic inequity and social injustice. And we're going to hear over the next couple of days very personal and very powerful talks on all those subjects. We're also going to hear from champions, political leaders, and people that we think of as pulse takers. And now my pulse is telling me that it's time for session one, and it's about my time.
But Pat, it's not just about your time, it's also about my time and all of our time. And it is time to introduce our first speaker. She is a professor at Rutgers, an author. She's an expert on gender and race throughout history and in popular culture today. And she's developed a unique perspective on time. She's here to share it with us. Please give a warm welcome to our first speaker, Brittany Cooper.
what if I told you that time has a race in the contemporary way that we understand race in the United States? Typically, we talk about race in terms of black and white issues. In the African American communities from which I come, we have a long-standing, multi-generational joke about what we call CP time, or colored people's time. Now, we no longer refer to African Americans as colored, but this long-standing joke about our perpetual lateness to church, to cookouts, to family events, and even to our own funerals remains. I personally am a stickler for time. It's almost as if my mother, when I was growing up, said, "We will not be those black people." So we typically arrive to events 30 minutes early. But today, I want to talk to you more about the political nature of time. For if time had a race, it would be white. White people own time. I know. Making such quote-unquote incendiary statements makes us uncomfortable. Haven't we moved past the point where race really matters? Isn't race a heavy-handed concept? Shouldn't we go ahead with our enlightened progressive selves and relegate useless concepts like race to the dustbins of history? How will we ever get over racism if we keep on talking about race? Perhaps we should lock up our concepts of race in a time capsule, bury them, and dig them up in 1,000 years, peer at them with the clearly more enlightened, raceless versions of ourselves that belong to the future. But you see there, that desire to mitigate the impact of race and racism shows up in how we attempt to manage time, in the ways we narrate history, in the ways we attempt to shove the negative truths of the present into the past, in the ways we attempt to argue that the future that we hope for is the present in which we're currently living. Now, when Barack Obama became president of the US in 2008, many Americans declared that we were post-racial. I'm from the academy, where we're enamored with being post-everything. We're postmodern, we're post-structural, we're post-feminist. Post has become a simple academic appendage that we apply to a range of terms to mark the way we were. But prefixes alone don't have the power to make race and racism a thing of the past. The US was never pre-race. So to claim that we're post-race when we have yet to grapple with the impact of race on Black people, Latinos, or the indigenous is disingenuous. Just about the moment that we were preparing to celebrate our post-racial future, our political conditions became the most racial they've been in the last 50 years. So today, I want to offer to you 3 observations about the past, the present, and the future of time as it relates to the combating of racism and white dominance. First, the past. Time has a history, and so do Black people. But we treat time as though it is timeless, as though it has always been this way, as though it doesn't have a political history bound up with the plunder of indigenous lands, the genocide of indigenous people, and the stealing of Africans from their homeland. When white male European philosophers first thought to conceptualize time and history, one famously declared, "Africa is no historical part of the world." He was essentially saying that Africans were people outside of history who had had no impact on time or the march of progress. This idea that Black people have had no impact on history is one of the foundational ideas of white supremacy. It's the reason that Carter G. Woodson created Negro History Week in 1926. It's the reason that we continue to celebrate Black History Month in the US every February. Now, we also see this idea that Black people are people either alternately outside the bounds of time or stuck in the past in a scenario where, much as I'm doing right now, a Black person stands up and insists that racism still matters, and a person, usually white, says to them, "Why are you stuck in the past? Why can't you move on? We have a Black president. We're past all that." Faulkner famously said, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." But my good friend, Professor Christy Dotson, says, "Our memory is longer than our lifespan." We carry, all of us, family and communal hopes and dreams with us. We don't have the luxury of letting go of the past. But sometimes our political conditions are so troubling that we don't know if we're living in the past or we're living in the present. Take, for instance, when Black Lives Matter protesters go out to protest unjust killings of Black citizens by police, and the pictures that emerge from the protest look like they could have been taken 50 years ago. The past won't let us go, but still, let us press our way into the present. At time and space. What do I mean? Well, I've already told you that white people own time. Those in power dictate the pace of the workday. They dictate how much money our time is actually worth. And Professor George Lipsitz argues that white people even dictate the pace of social inclusion. They dictate how long it will actually take for minority groups to receive the rights that they have been fighting for. Let me loop back to the past quickly to give you an example. If you think about the civil rights movement and the cries of its leaders for freedom now, they were challenging the slow pace of white social inclusion. By 1965, the year that the Voting Rights Act was passed, there had been a full 100 years between the end of the Civil War and the conferral of voting rights on African American communities. Despite the urgency of a war, it still took a full 100 years for actual social inclusion to occur. Since 2012, conservative state legislatures across the US have ramped up attempts to roll back African American voting rights by passing restrictive voter ID laws and curtailing early voting opportunities. This past July, a federal court struck down North Carolina's voter ID law, saying it, quote, targeted African Americans with surgical precision. Restricting African American inclusion in the body politic is a primary way that we attempt to manage and control people by managing and controlling time. But another place that we see these time-space clashes is in gentrifying cities like Atlanta, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Washington, D.C. Places that have had Black populations for generations. But now, in the name of urban renewal and progress, these communities are pushed out in service of bringing them into the 21st century. Professor Sharon Holland asked, what happens when a person who exists in time meets someone who only occupies space? These racial struggles are battles over those who are perceived to be space takers and those who are perceived to be world makers. Those who control the flow and thrust of history are considered world makers who own and master time. In other words, white people. But when Hegel famously said that Africa was no historical part of the world, he implied that it was merely a voluminous landmass taking up space at the bottom of the globe. Africans were space takers. So today, white people continue to control the flow and thrust of history, while too often treating Black people as though we are merely taking up space to which we are not entitled. Time and the march of progress is used to justify a stunning degree of violence towards our most vulnerable populations, who, being perceived as space takers rather than world makers, are moved out of the places where they live in service of bringing them into the 21st century. Shortened lifespan, according to zip code, is just one example of the ways that time and space cohere in an unjust manner in the lives of Black people. Children who are born in New Orleans zip code 70124, which is 93% white, can expect to live a full 25 years longer than children born in New Orleans zip code 70112, which is 60% Black. Children born in Washington, D.C.'s wealthy Maryland suburbs can expect to live a full 20 years longer than children born in its downtown neighborhoods. Ta-Nehisi Coates argues that the defining feature of being drafted into the Black race is the inescapable robbery of time. We experience time discrimination, he tells us, not just as structural, but as personal, in lost moments of joy, lost moments of connection, lost quality of time with loved ones, and lost years of healthy quality of life. in the future. Do you see Black people? Do Black people have a future? What if you belong to the very race of people who have always been pitted against time? What if your group is the group for whom a future was never imagined? These time-space clashes between protesters and police, between gentrifiers and residents, don't paint a very pretty picture of what America hopes for Black people's future. If the present is any indicator, our children will be undereducated, health maladies will take their toll, and housing will continue to be unaffordable. So if we're really ready to talk about the future, perhaps we should begin by admitting that we're out of time. We Black people have always been out of time. Time does not belong to us. Our lives are lives of perpetual urgency. Time is used to displace us, or conversely, we are urged into complacency through endless calls to just be patient. But if past is prologue, let us seize upon the ways in which we're always out of time anyway to demand with urgency freedom now. I believe the future is what we make it. But first, we have to decide that time belongs to all of us. No, we don't all get equal time, but we can decide that the time that we do get is just and free. We can zip code the primary determinant of your lifespan. We can stop stealing learning time from Black children through excessive use of suspensions and expulsions. We can stop stealing time from Black people through long periods of incarceration for nonviolent crimes. The police can stop stealing time and Black lives through use of excessive force. I believe the future is what we make it, but we can't get there on colored people's time, or white time, or your time, or even my time. It's our time, ours. Thank you.
A seismic shift in time perspective already this morning. And whether we're talking about my time, our time, one thing I think we share in common is really the feeling that as parents, as colleagues, as sisters, brothers, wives, husbands, we never seem to have enough of it to share with one another. So we're going to shift our perspective now to that very personal use of time. Journalist Laura Vanderkam says, we have enough time. We're just not making the best use of it. Please welcome Laura.
When people find out I write about time management, they assume two things. One is that I'm always on time, and I'm not. I have 4 small children, and I would like to blame them for my occasional tardiness, but sometimes it's just not their fault. I was once late to my own speech on time management. We all had to just take a moment together and savor that irony. The second thing they assume is that I have lots of tips and tricks for saving bits of time here and there. And sometimes I'll hear from magazines that are doing a story along these lines, generally on how to help their readers find an extra hour in the day. And the idea is that we'll shave bits of time off everyday activities, add it up, and we'll have time for the good stuff. And I question the entire premise of this piece. But I'm always interested in hearing what they've come up with before they call me. So some of my favorites: doing errands in a way where you only have to make right-hand turns, being extremely judicious in microwave usage, so it says 3 to 3.5 minutes on the package. We are totally getting in on the bottom side of that. And my personal favorite, which makes sense on some level, is to DVR your favorite shows so you can fast forward through the commercial. It's every half hour. So in the course of 2 hours of watching TV, you find 32 minutes to exercise, which is true. You know another way to find 32 minutes to exercise? Don't watch 2 hours of TV a day, right? Anyway, the idea is we'll save bits of time here and there, add it up, we will finally get to everything we want to do. But after studying how successful people spend their time and looking at their schedules hour by hour, I think this idea has it completely backward. We don't build the lives we want by saving time. We build the lives we want, and then time saves itself. Here's what I mean. I recently did a time diary project looking at 1,001 days in the lives of extremely busy women. They had demanding jobs, sometimes their own businesses, kids to care for, maybe parents to care for, community commitments, busy, busy people. I had them keep track and interviewed them about their strategies for my book, I Know How She Does It. Anyway, one of the women whose time log I studied, she goes out for a Wednesday night for something. She comes home to find that her water heater has broken, and there is now water all over her basement. If you've ever had anything like this happen to you, you know it is a hugely damaging, frightening, sopping mess. So she's dealing with the immediate aftermath that night. Next day, she's got plumbers coming in. Day after that, professional cleaning crew dealing with the ruined carpet. All this is being recorded on her time log, winds up taking 7 hours of her week. 7 hours. That's like finding an extra hour in the day. But I'm sure if you had asked her at the start of the week, could you find 7 hours to train for a triathlon? Could you find 7 hours to mentor 7 worthy people? I'm sure she would have said what most of us would have said, which is no. Can't you see how busy I am? Yet when she had to find 7 hours because there is water all over her basement, she found 7 hours. And what this shows us is that time is highly elastic. We cannot make more time, but time will stretch to accommodate what we choose to put into it. And so the key to time management is treating our priorities as the equivalent of that broken water heater. And to get at this, I like to use some language from one of the busiest people I ever interviewed. By busy, I mean she was running a small business with 12 people on the payroll. She had 6 children in her spare time. I was getting in touch with her to set up an interview on how she had it all, that phrase. I remember it was a Thursday morning, and she was not available to speak with me, of course, right? But the reason she was unavailable to speak with me is that she was out for a hike, because it was a beautiful spring morning, and she wanted to go for a hike. So, of course, this makes me even more intrigued, and when I finally do catch up with her, she explains it like this. She says, listen, Laura, everything I do, every minute I spend is my choice. And rather than say, I don't have time to do X, Y, or Z, she'd say, I don't do X, Y, or Z because it's not a priority. I don't have time often means it's not a priority. If you think about it, that's really more accurate language. I mean, I could tell you I don't have time to dust my blinds, but that's not true. If you offered to pay me $100,000 to go dust my blinds, I would get to it pretty quickly. Since that is not going to happen, I can acknowledge this is not a matter of lacking time. It's that I don't want to do it. Using this language reminds us that time is a choice. And granted, there may be horrible consequences for making different choices. I will give you that. But we are smart people, lives with the things that deserve to be there. So how do we do that? How do we treat our priorities as the equivalent of that broken water heater? Well, first we need to figure out what they are. And I want to give you 2 strategies for thinking about this. The first, on the professional side. I'm sure many people coming up to the end of the year are giving or getting annual performance reviews. You look back over your successes over the year, your opportunities for growth. And this serves its purpose, but I find it's more effective to do this looking forward. So I want you to pretend it's the end of next year. You're giving yourself a performance review, and it has been an absolutely amazing year for you professionally. What 3 to 5 things did you do that made it so amazing? So you can write next year's performance review now. And you can do this for your personal life, too. I'm sure many of you, like me, come December, get cards that contain these folded up sheets of colored paper, on which is written what is known as the family holiday letter. Bit of a wretched genre of literature, really, going on about how amazing everyone in the household is, or even more scintillating, how busy everyone in the household is. But these letters serve a purpose, which is that they tell your friends and family what you did in your personal life that mattered to you over the course of the year. So this year's kind of done, but I want you to pretend it's the end of next year. And it has been an absolutely amazing year for you and the people you care about. What 3 to 5 things did you do that made it so amazing? So you can write next year's family holiday letter now. Don't send it. Please, don't send it. But you can write it. And now between the performance review and the family holiday letter, we have a list of 6 to 10 goals we can work on in the next year. And now we need to break these down into doable steps. So maybe you want to write a family history. Well, first you can read some other family histories, get a sense for the style. And then maybe think about the questions you want to ask your relatives, set up appointments to interview them. Or maybe you want to run a 5K. So you need to find a race and sign up and figure out a training plan and dig those shoes out of the back of the closet. And then, this is key, we treat our priorities as the equivalent of that broken water heater by putting them into our schedules first. And we do this by thinking through our weeks before we are in them. I find a really good time to do this is Friday afternoons. Friday afternoon is what an economist might call a low opportunity cost time. Most of us are not sitting there on Friday afternoon saying, I am excited to make progress toward my personal and professional priorities right now. But we are willing to think about what those should be. So take a little bit of time Friday afternoon, make yourself a 3-category priority list: career, relationships, self. Making a 3-category list reminds us that there should be something in all 3 categories. Career we think about, relationships, self, not so much. But anyway, just a short list, 2 to 3 items in each. Then look out over the whole of the next week and see where you can plan them in. Where you plan them in is up to you. And I know this is going to be more complicated for some people than others. I mean, some people's lives are just harder than others. It is not going to be easy to find time to take that poetry class if you are caring for multiple children on your own. I get that. And I don't want to minimize anyone's struggle. But I do think that the numbers I am about to tell you are empowering. There are 168 hours in a week. 24 times 7 is 168 hours. That is a lot of time. If you are working a full-time job, so 40 hours a week, sleeping 8 hours a night, so 56 hours a week, that leaves 72 hours for other things. That is a lot of time. You say you're working 50 hours a week, maybe a main job and a side hustle. Well, that leaves 62 hours for other things. You say you're working 60 hours. Well, that leaves 52 hours for other things. You say you're working more than 60 hours. Well, are you sure? There was once a study comparing people's estimated work weeks with time diaries. Found that people claiming 75-plus hour work weeks were off by about 25 hours. You can guess in which direction, right? Anyway, in 168 hours a week, I think we can find time for what matters to you. If you want to spend more time with your kids, you want to study more for a test you're taking, you want to exercise for 3 hours and volunteer for 2, you can. And that's even if you're working way more than full-time hours. So we have plenty of time, which is great, because guess what? We don't even need that much time to do amazing things. But when most of us have bits of time, what do? Pull out the phone, right? Start deleting email for bits of joy. Maybe it's choosing to read something wonderful on the bus on the way to work. I know when I had a job that required 2 bus rides and a subway ride every morning, I used to go to the library on weekends to get stuff to read. Made the whole experience almost enjoyable. Breaks at work can be used for meditating or praying. If family dinner is out because of your crazy work schedule, maybe family breakfast could be a good substitute. It's about looking at the whole of one's time and seeing where the good stuff can go. I truly believe this. There is time. Even if we are busy, we have time for what matters. And when we focus on what matters, we can build the lives we want in the time we've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, so now that we have found all this extra time in our schedules, our next speaker is going to show us an app that can help us manage it. He was working for a climate change charity that Richard Branson started, and he was getting like 500 emails a day, and his calendar was double booked and looked like a Tetris game on a good day. And he was thinking, if my calendar looks like this, what does Richard Branson's calendar look like? And so he set out to create an app that would help the busiest among us. Let's welcome to the stage Peter Boyd.
In this next 4 minutes, over 500 million real emails will be sent and received by real people. Just way too much email is just one reason why my mission is to help the world's, to try to improve many lives by helping the world's busiest people better manage their time and their inbox. My idea to share today is to help in-demand leaders, all the rising stars trying to get hold of them, and the charities loved by both sides. So with time, where would leaders welcome help? Many try to force fit their to-do list on an urgent and important matrix, but are left confused about how to allocate their time and always feel like they're working in the wrong box. A more powerful picture of prioritization is the jar of time filled with rocks, pebbles, and sand. Placed in the jar in the right order, we can fit everything in, reminding us to focus on the big things in life first. Drawing two curves on top of the original matrix, and I think we see the area where we can help. Not with the rocks in the top right. Leaders spend most of their time there already. And not with the sand in the bottom left. They know what they don't value, and they don't waste time on it. They need help with the pebbles in the middle ground, a large part of their inbox competing for a small part of their time. Helping these deserving inquiries can be useful, fun, and give life meaning, like mentoring or new business pitches. So the service is just built. How could valuing this middle ground work? Consider Christiana Figueres, a wonderful force of nature who led the world through to the climate talks in Paris. Her inbox middle ground is full of good new ideas from rising stars in her field, like Robbie. Unfortunately for Robbie, he's not alone in just needing a few minutes to discuss his proposal. So, now with the new service in place, Christiana can give Robbie and everyone else with a good idea something to do. So he sent her private profile, and he sees clearly what she wants to talk about and when she's available. And he selects to buy a raffle ticket for new ideas on Skype. With the ticket proceeds split, 70% to the charity of Christiana's choice, and 20% to his own, picked from a long list of health, education, environment, and more. If he wins, he's delighted, and he prepares hard, boosting the quality of the meeting for both of them. If he loses, well, at least he knows where he stands, and he's avoided no reply limbo. So could this work for a leader in any field? Deborah Kallmeyer, founder and CEO of travel company Roar Africa, always prioritizes her clients. So she sends her private profile to her inbox middle ground. Good ideas again, coming from American agencies wanting to work on her website and African companies wanting to work on her trips. So if I'm an African tour guide, I see for $20 fixed donation, I can squeeze onto her calendar, guaranteed, and I go for it. Because I'm just as passionate about the South African College of Tourism for Girls as she is, 90% of my money can go to them. After I donate, then Deborah sends me some times when she's more than happy to chat. So she's very transparent on her priorities. She keeps an eye open for new opportunities. And more girls can graduate from the college. So this experience has improved many lives. The leader can answer all her emails and manage and better engage with her inbox, saving her and her team time and helping her favorite charity. The rising stars, all them trying to get hold of her, now know where they stand, save their own time, and help their own charity. And charities are the new beneficiaries of this exchange, raising money and awareness from a host of leaders, including their own high-profile supporters. So I've started working with some very busy leaders, and I found the project's inbuilt irony, how difficult it is for leaders to really take the time to think about time. But the harder it is to capture their attention, the bigger the impact I think we can have in the long run. Our time on this earth is fleeting and enormously precious. If you're busy and in demand, then consider how valuing some of your time for good could transform many lives, including your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I love that. So our next speaker has struggled with a time challenge that I'll bet is all too familiar to most of us here in the room and watching elsewhere. But she has made it through to the other side, and she's learned some important lessons along the way. She's here to share them with us. I know I will be listening closely. Please welcome to the stage. Sorry, I just lost my. Sorry, let's hold that. Please welcome to the stage, Linda Sievertson.
I am a time debtor. I was given that lovely label at 10 p.m. one night. I just made a pot of black tea to fuel yet another work-related all-nighter, and my friend Jade, she wasn't having it. She'd seen me do this before and was all freaked out it was going to hurt my health. Time debtor. I hadn't heard the term before, but I could feel truth all over it. Was I wasting time I didn't have, always racing to catch up? Okay, fine, but was she suggesting I had to somehow reimburse myself for the hours of sleep I was about to lose? Yeah, like that was going to happen. In regular debting, you spend money that you don't have, so it would make sense that in time debting, you spend the time that you do have incorrectly. But I didn't have a choice. My mind flashed on the 60 all-nighters I had clocked that year to keep from losing everything. My husband of 19 years had left me for another woman, but I was keeping it together. I mean, my house had slipped into foreclosure, and I couldn't bribe our grieving teenager out of his bathrobe for $1 million. But I knew I'd be okay if I could just power through more billable work hours. Never mind that what I needed were more life hours. Part of me really wanted to be open-minded that night, talking with Jade about this time debtor crap. But honestly, I was proud that I could rally while everyone else slept. And besides, I was liquored up on caffeine. I didn't have time for a bummer reality check. Then she said that she had been going to DA meetings. That's short for Debtors Anonymous. Now I'm thinking she's really lost it. She's not in debt. But she explained there are all kinds of debtors. You can lose your time in many different ways. Live beyond your means. And I was like, she said, Linda, your work hours are out of control. Of course, she was right. I wasn't spending my time wisely. I was over-investing in client care and under-investing in self-care. I was so busy reacting to other people's emergencies that I had little time for the prevention of my own. Instead of manage my time was managing me. It was pretty devastating to see how even the most important things to me were not immune. My son and I had just written a book together about protecting the environment. It was really dear to my heart. But I was too busy with work and divorce drama to fully promote it. But I know I'm not alone. As I think of my successful friends, time debting is the norm. More than an addiction, I would say that it's become an affliction, a disease of our era. So I got myself to a couple of Debtors Anonymous meetings, and I read everything I could that they offered, and all of it rocked my world, especially a symptom of compulsive debting that DA calls terminal vagueness. Did you catch that? That's terminal. Not as in airport, but as in lethal. As in when you don't have an accurate sense of your situation, your denial and bad habits can kill you. But even if being vague doesn't shorten your life, it does prevent you from fully living it. One cure for terminal vagueness is tracking. track your numbers, track your time. But I tracked my money. I had my bills on a huge color-coded wall chart. But when it came to time specifically, I wasn't tracking the right metrics. Imagine that X is your number of hours and Y is your number of years over the course of a lifetime. We think our X and Y are infinite, but of course they're not. We say that time is money, but it isn't. I've lost enough loved ones in my life to know that time is energy. It's our lifeblood. When we drain it away, it's gone. Our plan's bankrupt. So, I had to get real. And I'd like to get real here with you about what time debt looks like and how I got the situation largely under control, because maybe you'll relate. It started by seeing that those all-nighters I was so bloody proud of were sapping the quality of my all-dayers. What I'd thought of as a net was in fact a net not. To put this in monetary terms, let's say that you earn $3,000 a month and you spend $5,000. Well, it's pretty easy to see that's not going to work for very long, right? You can ignore the overspend, you can choose not to open up your bills, but you're still in the red and it's recorded somewhere. But who keeps a balance sheet of their time? Okay, in this audience, some of you probably do, but are you tracking what matters most to you or just clocking hours on your smartphone? So what does life look like through the eyes of a time debtor? Here are 4 common symptoms. See if any of these feel familiar. Number 1 is thinking you're a machine. This is believing that you should be able to do whatever it takes just because you used to or because someone else expects you to. What you really crave is sanity and long-term fuel, but you gorge on candy bars for a quick energy high and then curl up in the fetal position under your desk. Number 2 is forgetting the shit happens factor. This is the call from your high-maintenance coworker you knew you didn't have time to answer, or the surprise detour on the way to your meeting. Boom, you're in the red time-wise, and your day has barely begun. Number 3 of the law of time and space, physics. You know you have to be at work by 9 a.m., but you're still trying to pack in a workout, cook for the entire family, and make a call to your best friend. You've been an adult for years now, people, but you're still shocked by how long regular, everyday stuff takes. I saved my favorite for last. Number 4 is time shock. This is where you look up at the clock and go, oh my God, what just happened? I'm so sorry, I thought I had more time. You've literally lost time, like aliens have abducted you. For me, tracking my time, minutes it takes to do most things. Second, I had to uncover the emotions underneath my behavior so I could get to the heart of why. Time debting is often a symptom of something deep and dangerous. Our emotional lives can have our schedules by the throat. Some people spend way more time at work than their peers because they have a deep fear of not being good enough. Others invest in friendships that don't serve them because they fear loneliness. Many run themselves ragged so they don't have to feel. When I look back at where I lost the most time, hands down it was to relationship drama. With my ex, I had spent a lot of time in and recovering from our dysfunction. I had made a diary document on my computer, and I logged the beautiful stuff, but also his hurtful words and his betrayals. But I often erased those entries when he would apologize because I loved him. And I felt guilty for focusing on the negative, for recording the truth of my own feelings. After my separation, I fell for a sexy mystery man who baked homemade pies and sang love songs. Yeah. And very quickly, I was derailed by his moods, and I was spending valuable time up at night helping him build his business when I needed more rest for my own. Once again, as vague in love as I was with time, I no longer erased my diary entries, thank God, but I could not make sense of them. He yelled at me at noon and then wined and dined me at 7. He shut me down with silence and then reeled in my kid with laughter. My poor sister and friends were on speed dial. And we spent stupid amounts of time processing. Is this normal? Am I happy? Is there more good than bad? But here's the thing. We live in a society that measures everything to the cent, to the inch, to the pound, but we have no way to clearly assess our own feelings. One day I had an idea. If I color code my diary entries to match my overall feelings, maybe I can be my own witness, my own best friend, put myself on speed dial. It started simple with only 3 colors: blue for tears, yellow for mellow, and green for romance. Colors, y'all, don't lie. I could see my romance at a glance, and blissful green days were always followed by tearful blue ones. Our life together was more sad than happy. I could see the loss of days, and I had such a bill to pay. I had been so blind. I wasted time in unhappy relationships and wasted more time trying to make sense of them. My patterns didn't change because you can't change what you don't see. Logging my feelings put color and shape around the time I had wasted. I had been powerless, but I now had the power in my own hands. Time dating affects everyone. Think for a minute about which emotions concerning love or work or body image or family or friendship are draining your lifeblood. Which emotions and bad habits are robbing you of your vitality. We all long to make a difference in this world, and we lose chunks of time, priceless momentum. Don't get me wrong, there will always be spans of time that put us into debt, like grief, that require their own timetable, or situations too complex to track, like moving or having a baby. But how often do you rush through the things you really want to focus on? I'm now a recovering time debtor. I could have done that earlier if someone had taken me by the shoulders and said, look where you're spending your time. Color coding on my calendar, on my computer, saved me, and it was so easy. I highly recommend it. You can also use paper and highlighters if you want a calendar and highlighters. I also, if you have an iPhone, I created an app to make it even easier. As you can see, it's called the Boyfriend Log, but you can track anything. Nowadays, I make paying myself a priority, and my head hits that pillow by 11 p.m. I would never, ever think to drink a mug, much less a pot of black tea after sundown. The other night, my fiance and I were snuggled up watching a movie, and the thought of working late to make up for lost time felt like someone else's nightmare. In the mornings, before I even think to check my email, I make the time to check in with me first to see what I need from me. I have become my own best friend. So think about making time your new boyfriend or partner or best buddy or favorite client. The joy you want to log, how you spend your time can feel like the longest, most miserable relationship of your life or the best love affair you've ever had. So I stand before you today hoping that the minutes you have so generously shared with me have been well spent, and that you give yourself the gift of the time it takes to accomplish whatever matters most to you. Refuse to write a bad check on your greatest asset, your time, your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Now it's time to think about time from a scientific point of view. So we have with us a neurologist, Layla Davachi, and she studies the connections between time and memory, and is here to share her new research and her perceptions about how memory defines time. Please welcome Layla.
I was in labor for 72 hours with my first child. My husband and I were hunkered down in our small Greenwich Village apartment. In the moment, I thought it would never end. But now when I think back on those 72 hours, they feel like a blink compared to the 2 minutes between hearing my daughter cry for the first time and being able to hold her in my arms. In those 2 minutes, I remember the sound of her cry. I remember the doctors and nurses commenting on her full head of dark hair. I remember my husband leaving my side to film her first weigh-in, foot stamp, and eye gel. I remember the clock on the wall, 5:32 a.m. I remember seeing her face for the first time, and I said, "Hi, baby." And when she heard my voice, she opened her eyes. Now, when I think back on those 2 minutes, they seem limitless. Now, there are many ways people have talked about time. Time is money, time flies like an arrow, and this is all meant to capture an aspect of what time means in specific contexts. And today I'm here to share with you a personal and scientific discovery that for all of us, time is memory. So before I explain this further, it's important to differentiate between objective and subjective time. And in order to do that, we're going to do a little experiment, because that's what I do best. I'm going to show you 2 short videos, and I simply want you to watch them. And afterwards, I'm going to ask you to tell me which video was longer. Okay? So 1, go. And 2. Okay, raise your hand if you thought the first was longer. Great. Now raise your hand if you thought the second was longer. Okay. Well, both videos were actually objectively the same length. They were both 5 seconds. But subjective time is how long it feels like it took to you. We all vary in our perceptions of time. Some of you may have thought the first took longer, and some of you may have thought the second took longer. But the important thing to glean from this example is that time does not exist, at least not in the way that we might think if you're looking at your watch. But instead, it's an extraction based on reality, and it's related to memory. So how do we know this? 1, we know that if you lose your memory, you can't cobble together people with places or things, then every day is new, and not in a good way. You would live in an eternal present. And this is perhaps best exemplified by the famous story of patient HM. HM was incredibly debilitated by severe epilepsy, and after many years of suffering, he opted to undergo a surgery to relieve his seizures. However, after the surgery, HM could no longer form any new memories. He could remember all of his years leading up to the surgery, but no matter how many objective minutes, hours, days, or even years had passed after the surgery, HM had subjectively only lived a few more moments. So while this is an extreme example, it highlights that memory is our way of reliving our past experiences and re-experiencing our time. And it follows then that the more discrete memories you have from a prior experience, that experience becomes expanded in time. So there's a tendency, almost complete agreement, that we as humans want more time. There's never enough time. But I don't think it's just time that we want. Instead, we long to lead a full life. Now, what I want to share with you is if time is memory and we want more time, then what we really want are more memories. Leading a full life refers to the idea of having lots of varied experiences, ones that will later be memorable. So far, this might seem straightforward, but it gets a little complicated. Because as exemplified in the story of my labor and birth, how we feel time passing in the moment is different from how we retrospectively remember time. And the interesting finding is that our estimates of time in the moment are negatively related to those estimates in memory. So let me unpack that for you a little bit. Let's start with the in-the-moment perception. We know that every day contains the same number of minutes and hours, but our subjective perception of each day can vary widely. Some days go by quickly, and others not so quickly. So in the moment, what produces this variance in how we experience time passing? Well, it turns out that experiences that contain very little change over time are the ones that seem to drag on and take subjectively longer than experiences that contain a lot of change. But now consider how we reflect back and remember time. It actually works in the opposite direction. If you're asked to remember a very mundane experience, you have little to remember, and your estimates of time shrink rapidly, even though in the moment it felt like it would never end. And by contrast, when you're asked to remember a very eventful experience, one that felt like it was passing very quickly, you would have a lot to remember, and your estimates of that experience would actually expand. So stepping back a little, what does this tell us about how we remember our time? Well, we remember our time with respect to our experiences, what you're doing with your time, how much you were doing. The more places you've been to, people you've spoken to, or even thoughts that you've had, the longer you remember that experience to have been. So how will we study this in the lab? Actually, let's make this a little bit more concrete. Think of each discrete event as a unit of experience. And these units are later available for recall. Think of them as memory units. In an environment with a lot of variety and change, you're forming far more memory units than an environment with very little change. And it's these units, the number of these units, that determine our estimates of time later on. More units, more to remember, and time expands. Time is memory. So how have we studied this in the lab? In the lab, we've come up with very simple ways to try to mimic these ideas of contextual stability and change in experimentally tractable ways. And in several experiments, we've studied how people remember time. Participants will come into the lab and they'll look at a computer screen, and we'll present a series of visual images of objects and faces, one at a time, a new one on each trial. Think of these as the people and objects in your experiences. Now, to mimic the idea of a context, alongside each image, we present a picture of a scene. And that scene will either remain the same, as in this example, across time, to mimic the idea of doing the same thing in the same way, or the scene will change. Now, later on, we ask participants a simple question. We show them a pair of images, and we simply ask them to tell us how far apart did you experience these two images. Now, unbeknownst to the participants, we craft the memory test so that the pairs of images had actually been presented objectively the same distance apart, about 20 seconds. But some of the pairs of images were presented with the same scene, hypothetically forming one memory unit, while other pairs of images were paired across a scene change, hypothetically forming two memory units. So even though the objective amount of time was exactly the same, what we see is that participants reliably rate visual images as having been encountered farther apart in time when they had been experienced across a scene change. So remembering two memory units compared to one makes your memory for time expand. It's as if the changes in our environment have the consequence of pulling things apart in memory and time and making the intervals between them seem to last longer. So to give you an everyday example, imagine you go to the supermarket and you run into your friend Suri in aisle 3, and then sometime later you run into another good friend, Raphael, in another aisle in the supermarket. So take the same example that's identical, except now you run into Raphael in the parking lot. Later on, you'll remember the two encounters to be farther apart in time if they had occurred in the two different contexts. Okay? But the interesting thing is, what if I had plopped down in the moment and met you in the parking lot and asked you to tell me how much time had passed on your trip to the supermarket? Now you'd get the opposite answer. The analogy here is I would stop you in the parking lot as you're loading groceries into your car and simply ask you, how long have you been here? In that case, you would rate the changing environment as taking a shorter amount of time than the stable environment. So the bottom line is that in the moment, we feel like a busy day is passing very quickly. A changing environment feels like we're losing our time. It's going by quickly. But later, when your memory is probed, those same experiences feel like they took a longer amount of time. Time expands. So far, what the examples I've shown you suggest that our memory for time is actually an interpretation of the events that are unfolding around us. And our next question was, what do we rely on for this interpretation? So far, all of the examples I've given you suggest that changes in the external world, like these scene changes in my example, are going to determine how you remember time. But is it completely up to the external world? The answer is no. we've shown that how you remember time is modulated by your internal worlds, your own interpretation of the events that are unfolding. So we've done these same kinds of tasks using brain imaging, and what we can do is we can measure your internal world, your brain, while you're viewing the same kinds of images. And specifically what we do is we can take still pictures of your brain at the beginning of a series of images and then at the end, and we can compare the neural activity patterns that are present at the beginning and end of these experiences. And what we see is that if your neural activity patterns look very different across time, as in this example, you remember the associated events as having been encountered farther apart in time. It's as if your changing brain patterns offer an interpretation that you were in two very different contexts, in this case mental context, at the beginning and end of this series of images. On other trials, even though the same objective amount of time has passed, your brain patterns might look more similar across time. And what we see is that when your neural activity patterns are more similar, it has the consequence of bringing the associated items into a closer, more integrated memory trace. And you remember those items as having been encountered closer in time together. So the important implication here is that even when the external environment is changing a lot, you can maintain a stable internal experience. And by contrast, if the external world isn't changing very much, you can create distinctive experiences in your mind. So in the end, this offers an important element of control. A good example of this for me is my morning commute. I live in New York City, and I take the subway to work every day, for better or for worse. And my commute contains lots of people, the sounds of their music, smells emanating from their food, and sometimes their bodies. And at every stop, new folks get on and some folks get off. And some mornings I feel like my experience is anchored on the external environment. I notice a cute little girl and I smile at her, or I cringe at the lack of deodorant on my neighbor. This happens a lot. And you can bet if you could look at my neural activity patterns in that moment, they'd be varying widely as I attend to all the various elements of that experience. But on other mornings, I might be trying to figure out a problem at work, and I barely notice the stops passing by. Now that's an example of maintaining a stable internal experience. So, given that we have some control over time through memory, which do we prioritize? Which will you prioritize? Well, there's no right answer, right? And our priorities might change from day to day. Do you prioritize the feeling that time is passing slowly, as on a lazy Sunday or a day at the beach? Or do you prioritize having lots of memories by leading an action-packed, full life? Again, there's no right answer, and your priorities will likely change from day to day. But I hope what I've shared with you today will let you know that time is memory, and with that knowledge in hand, know that you control time. Thank you.
Layla. Thinking about memories, you know, this year's Nobel laureate Bob Dylan said, "Take care of your memories because you can't relive them." Another feature new to this year's TED Women are 5 original short films made by award-winning women directors. This idea came to us from Chicken and Egg Pictures, a group well known in the women's community and in the film community for the support and advocacy they do for women directors, particularly nonfiction women directors who are making stories that catalyze social change. And they came to us and said, let us curate films made by women directors on the subject of your theme of the conference, time. So throughout this conference, you'll be seeing 5 original films. And this idea was put out to the women's community. 30 award-winning women directors responded. We could have taken all of them had we had time for 30 films. 5 took up the challenge to make a short film on a little budget and a small amount of time. Here's the first one by award-winning director Grace Lee.
The to-do list is never ending, so you just keep going. That's what moms do. And that's what professional women do. We just have to keep going.
Just to be frank, I'm sort of my son's slave.
The first hour and a half of my morning is
getting the kids out for school.
Yes, I am one of those mothers who does her makeup in the car. I'll make phone calls in the car.
I will obviously be checking my emails for anything that's come in from, say, the East Coast that's work-related.
So I get there, I prep for my lectures.
And that goes until my kids get out of school, which starts at around like the same kind of reverse pickup around 3 o'clock.
I start my servitude again when I, when I get home.
Figure out what everyone's gonna eat. Before you know it, it's like the end of the day. If I could have extra time, how much time would I need?
I would do so much with an additional 4 hours.
I would like to have 4 hours every day.
3, let's say 3.
Bare minimum, an additional 8 hours.
Probably about 6 to 8 hours.
From 6:30 to 10:30, 11, if I could have 2 of those in one day, I think I'd be the president of the United States. That is surprising.
Wow, 60 additional days of the year? That would be great.
It would be nice to get more sleep.
I would use that first hour to just sort of get myself in a state of mind. It takes a while to relax.
I'd write, I'd run, I'd swim, I'd dance, like so many things. I'd go to the beach.
I know I'm supposed to say exercise, but I hate to do physical activity. I think it's a waste of time.
I would get massages. I would get my nails done. I'd get my hair cut more than once a year.
I haven't read a book without thinking about something else I have to do for years.
I just want the ability to pause time for a moment to be able to rejuvenate or get some rest.
I think that the answer I'm supposed to say is that I would take time for myself and meditate and take a bath. That's not what I'm gonna do. I'm probably just gonna pile more work in.
Don't you think that if we were given more time, we would fill it with all the things that we had to do? So I don't know that it would ever be enough.
Sure sounded familiar to me. Let's recognize the award-winning director of this film, Grace Lee. So great that you made it, Grace. I also want to thank Lifetime Networks, who funded these films through their Broad Focus initiative. And thanks again to Chicken and Egg for their great idea in bringing it to us. One of the things that this film and so many others, as well as the talks throughout our time together, keeps reminding us is really how precious our time is. And one of the big decisions that faces every parent, especially young mothers, deciding whether or not to spend that time in the early months breastfeeding and bonding. Did you ever wonder, why do mammal babies suck? Well, our next guest wondered. She's a lactation researcher. Katie Hendy is here to share some really important research on the biological and sociological implications of mother's milk. Please welcome Katie.
Have you ever heard the one about how breastfeeding is free? Yeah, it's pretty funny, because it's only free if we don't value women's time and energy. Any mother can tell you how much time and energy it takes to liquefy her body, to literally dissolve herself as she feeds this precious little cannibal. Milk is why mammals suck. At Arizona State University, in the Comparative Lactation Lab, I decode mother's milk composition to understand its complexity and how it influences infant development. However, this work is not just academic to me, because in 15 years of scholarship, the most important thing that I've learned is that we do not do enough to support mothers and babies. From deficits in basic research, to limitations of clinical support, to failures of institutional structure, to the traumas of historical disparities and current disparities. We do not provide enough support to mothers and babies. And when we fail mothers and babies, we fail everyone who loves mothers and babies. The fathers, the partners, the grandparents, the aunties, the friends and kin that make our human social networks. It's time that we abandon simple solutions and simple slogans and grapple with the nuance. I was very fortunate to run smack dab into that nuance very early during my first interview with a journalist. When she asked me, how long should a mother breastfeed her baby? And it was that word should that brought me up short. Because I will never tell a woman what she should do with her body. Don't get me wrong, I love milk. The synthesis of milk by mammary glands is the defining characteristic of mammals. It's how we get our name. And for over 200 million years, natural selection has shaped this adaptation that allows mammals to have lived on every planet. This adaptation, this adaptation has allowed mammals to live on every continent and in locations that would otherwise be deadly to babies. Babies survive and thrive because their mother's milk is food, medicine, and signal. For young infants, mother's milk is a complete diet that provides all the building blocks for their bodies, that shapes their brain, and fuels all of their activity. Mother's milk also feeds the microbes that are colonizing the infant's intestinal tract. Mothers aren't just eating for two, they're eating for 2 to the trillions. Milk provides immunofactors that help fight pathogens, and mother's milk provides hormones that signal to the infant's body. But in recent decades, we have come to take milk for granted. We stopped seeing something in plain sight. We began to think of milk as standardized, homogenized, pasteurized, packaged, powdered, flavored, and formulated. We abandoned the milk of human kindness and turned our priorities elsewhere. At the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C., is the National Medicine of in Washington, D.C., in the National Institutes of Health, is the National Library of Medicine, which contains 25 million articles, the brain trust of life science and biomedical research. And we can use keywords to search that database. And when we do that, we discover nearly 1 million articles about pregnancy, but far fewer about breast milk and lactation. Let's look at this a different way. Computer, enhance. When we zoom in on the number of articles just investigating breast milk, we see that we know much more about coffee, wine, and tomatoes. We know over twice as much about erectile dysfunction. And I'm not saying we shouldn't know about those things. I'm a scientist. I think we should know about everything. Okay? But that we know so much less about breast milk, the first fluid a young mammal is adapted to consume, should make us angry. And we need to know these things. Globally, 9 out of 10 women will have at least one child in her lifetime. That means that nearly 130 million babies are born each year. These mothers and babies deserve our best science. Okay? Recent research has shown that milk doesn't just grow the body, it fuels behavior and shapes neurodevelopment. In 2015, researchers discovered that the mixture of breast milk and baby saliva, specifically baby saliva, causes a chemical reaction that produces hydrogen peroxide that can kill staph and salmonella. And from humans and other mammal species, we're starting to understand that the biological recipe of milk can be different when produced for sons or daughters. When we reach for donor milk in the neonatal intensive care unit or formula on the store shelf, it's nearly one size fits all. We aren't thinking about how sons and daughters may grow at different rates or different ways, and that milk may be a part of that. Mothers have gotten the message, and the vast majority of mothers intend to breastfeed, but many do not reach their breastfeeding goals. That is not their failure. It's ours. Increasingly common medical conditions like obesity, endocrine disorders, C-section, and preterm births all can disrupt the underlying biology of lactation. And many women do not have knowledgeable clinical support. 25 years ago, the World Health Organization and UNICEF, 25 years ago, the World Health Organization and UNICEF established criteria for hospitals to be considered baby-friendly that provide the optimal level of support for mother-infant bonding and infant feeding. Today, only 1 in 5 babies in the United States is born in a baby-friendly hospital. This is a problem because mothers can grapple with many problems in the minutes, hours, days, and weeks of lactation. They can have struggles with establishing latch, with pain, with milk letdown, and perceptions of milk supply. These mothers deserve knowledgeable clinical staff that understand these processes. Oh, sorry. Mothers will call me as they're grappling with these struggles, crying with wobbly voices. It's not working. This is what I'm supposed to naturally be able to do. Why is it not working? And just because something is evolutionarily ancient doesn't mean that it's easy or that we're instantly good at it. You know what else is evolutionarily ancient? Sex. And nobody expects us to start out being good at it. Clinicians best deliver quality, equitable care when they have continuing education about how to best support lactation and breastfeeding. And in order to have that continuing education, we need to anchor it to cutting-edge research in both the life sciences and the social sciences. Because we need to recognize that too often, historical traumas and implicit biases sit in the space between a new mother and her clinician. The body is political. If our breastfeeding support is not intersectional, it's not good enough. And for moms who have to return to work because countries like the United States do not provide paid parental leave, they can have to go back in as short as just a few days after giving birth. How do we optimize mother and infant health? Just by messaging. How do we optimize mother and infant health just by messaging about breast milk to moms without providing the institutional support that facilitates that mother-infant bonding to support breastfeeding? The answer is we can't. I'm talking to you, legislators, and the voters who elect them. I'm talking to you, job creators and collective bargaining units and workers and shareholders. We all have a stake in the public health of our community, and we all have a role to play in achieving it. From the NICU, where infants are born early or sick or injured, breast milk matters. It can make babies, let me step back. Breast milk is a part of improving human health. In the NICU, when infants are born early or sick or injured, milk or bioactive constituents in milk can be critically important. In environments or ecologies or communities where there's high risk of infectious disease, breast milk can be incredibly protective. Where there are emergencies like storms and earthquakes, when the electricity goes out, when safe water is not available, breast milk can keep babies fed and hydrated. And in the context of humanitarian crises, like Syrian mothers fleeing war zones, the smallest drops can buffer babies from the biggest global challenges. But understanding breast milk is not just about messaging to mothers and policymakers and employers. It's also about understanding what is important in breast milk so that we can deliver better formulas to moms who cannot or do not breastfeed for whatever reason. We can all do a better job of supporting the diversity of moms raising their babies in a diversity of ways. Mothers are more than their mammary glands. And babies are more than their mothers. They rely on a number of different individuals within their family and friend network that help them to become the people they are and will be. Stop putting it all on mothers, especially because some families don't include a mom. And lastly, women are more than their motherhood. As women around the world struggle to achieve political, social, and economic equality, we must reimagine motherhood as not the central core aspect of womanhood, but one of the many potential facets of what make women awesome. It's time.
Thank you, Katie. Katie is a model for how, wasn't that a quick recovery? We were laughing. She's terrific, as are all our speakers. They've all worked so hard to bring these talks to us. Our final speaker in this session is Elizabeth Lesser. Elizabeth is a writer who thinks deeply and writes beautifully about the complexities and challenges of relationships. Her recent book, Mara, takes us on a journey of life and death, and she's here to share it with us now. Please welcome Elizabeth Lesser.
Like many of us, I've had several careers in my life, and although they've been varied, my first job set the foundation for all of them. I was a home birth midwife throughout my 20s. Delivering babies taught me valuable and sometimes surprising things, like how to start a car at 2 a.m. when it's 10 degrees below zero, or how to revive a father who's fainted at the sight of blood, or how to cut the umbilical cord just so to make a beautiful belly button. But those aren't the things that stuck with me or guided me when I stopped being a midwife and started other jobs. What stuck with me was this bedrock belief that each one of us comes into this world with a unique worth. When I looked into the face of a newborn, I caught a glimpse of that worthiness, that sense of unapologetic selfhood, that unique spark. I use the word soul to describe that spark because it's the only word in English that comes close to naming what each baby brought into the room. Every newborn was as singular as a snowflake, a matchless mashup of biology and ancestry and mystery. Baby grows, and in gender, that little one begins to cover its soul layer by layer. We're born this way, but as we grow, a lot of things happen to us that make us want to hide our soulful eccentricities and authenticity. We've all done this. Everyone in this room is a former baby with a distinctive birthright. But as adults, we spend so much of our time uncomfortable in our own skin. Like we have ADD, authenticity deficit disorder. But not those babies, not yet. Their message to me was, uncover your soul and look for that soul spark in everyone else. It's still there. And here's what I learned from laboring women. Their message was about staying open even when things are painful. A woman's cervix normally looks like this. It's a tight little muscle at the base of the uterus. And during labor, it has to stretch from this to this. Ouch. If you fight against that pain, you just create more pain and you block what wants to be born. I'll never forget the magic that would happen when a woman stopped resisting the pain and opened. It was as if the forces of the universe took notice and sent in a wave of help. I never forgot that message. And now when difficult or painful things happen to me in my life or my work, of course, at first I resist them, but then I remember what I learned from the mothers. Stay open, stay curious, ask the pain what it's come to deliver. Something new wants to be born. And there was one more big soulful lesson, and that one I learned from Albert Einstein. He wasn't at any of the births, but it was a lesson about time. At the end of his life, Albert Einstein concluded that we were, and all the while, underneath surface time is this whole other dimension where the past and the present and the future merge and become deep time. And there's nowhere to get to. Albert Einstein called this state, this dimension, only being. And he said when he experienced it, he knew sacred awe. When I was delivering babies, I was forced off the hamster wheel. Sometimes I had to sit for days, hours and hours, just breathing with the parents, just being. And I got a big dose of sacred awe. So those are the three lessons I took with me from midwifery. 1, uncover your soul. 2, when things get difficult or painful, try to stay open. And 3, every now and then step off your hamster wheel into deep time. Those lessons have served me throughout my life, but they really served me recently when I took on the most important job of my life thus far. 2 years ago, my sister came out of remission from a rare blood cancer, and the only treatment left for her was a bone marrow transplant. And against the odds, we found a match for her who turned out to be me. I come from a family of 4 girls, and when my sisters found out that I was my sister's perfect genetic match, their reaction was, "Really? You? A perfect match for her?" Which is pretty typical for siblings. In a sibling society, there's lots of things. There's love, and there's friendship, and there's protection, but there's also jealousy, and competition, and rejection, and attack. In siblinghood, that's where we start assembling many of those first layers that cover our soul. When I discovered I was my sister's match, I went into research mode. And I discovered that the premise of transplant is pretty straightforward. You destroy all the bone marrow in the cancer patient with massive doses of chemotherapy, and then you replace that marrow with several million healthy marrow cells from a donor. And then you do everything you can to make sure that those new cells engraft in the patient. I also learned that bone marrow transplants are fraught with danger. If my sister made it through the near lethal chemotherapy, she still would face other challenges. My cells might attack her body, and her body might reject my cells. They call this rejection or attack, and both could kill her. Rejection, attack, those words had a familiar ring in the context of being siblings. My sister and I had a long history of love, but we also had a long history of rejection and attack, from minor misunderstandings to bigger betrayals. We didn't have the kind of relationship where we talked about the deeper stuff, but like many siblings and like people in all kinds of relationships, we were hesitant to tell our truths, to reveal our wounds, to admit our wrongdoings. But when I learned about the dangers of rejection or attack, I thought, it's time to change this. What if we left the bone marrow transplant up to the doctors, but did something that we later came to call our soul marrow transplant? What if we faced any pain we had caused each other, and instead of rejection or attack, could we listen? Could we forgive? Could we merge? Would that teach ourselves to do the same? To woo my skeptical sister, I turned to my parents' holy text, the New Yorker magazine. I sent her a cartoon from its pages as a way of explaining why we should visit a therapist before having my bone marrow harvested and transplanted into her body. Here it is. I have never forgiven him for that thing I made up in my head. I told my sister we had probably been doing the same thing, carting around made-up stories in our heads that kept us separate. And I told her that after the transplant, all the blood flowing in her veins would be my blood, made from my marrow cells, and that inside the nucleus of each of those cells is a complete set of my DNA. I will be swimming around in you for the rest of your life, I told my slightly horrified sister. I think we better clean up our relationship. A health crisis makes people do all sorts of risky things, like quitting a job or jumping out of an airplane. And in the case of my sister, saying yes to several therapy sessions, during which we got down to the marrow. We looked at and released years of stories and assumptions about each other, and blame and shame, until all that was left was love. People have said I was brave to undergo the bone marrow harvest, but I don't think so. What felt brave to me was that other kind of harvest and transplant, the soul marrow transplant, getting emotionally naked with another human being, putting aside pride and defensiveness, lifting the layers, and sharing with each other our vulnerable souls. I called on those midwife lessons. Uncover your soul. Open to what's scary and painful. Look for the sacred awe. Here I am with my marrow cells after the harvest. That's what they call it, harvest, like it's some kind of bucolic farm-to-table event, which I can assure you it is not. And here is my brave, brave sister receiving my cells. After the transplant, we began to spend more and more time together. It was as if we were little girls again. The past and the present merged. We entered deep time. I left the hamster wheel of work and life to join my sister on that lonely island of illness and healing. We spent months together in the isolation unit, in the hospital, and in her home. Our fast-paced society does not support or even value this kind of work. We see it as a disruption of real life and important work. We worry about the emotional drain and the financial cost. And yes, there is a financial cost, but I was paid in the kind of currency that our culture seems to have forgotten all about. I was paid in love. I was paid in soul. I was paid in my sister. My sister said that the year after transplant was the best year of her life, which was surprising. She suffered so much, but she said life never tasted as sweet, and that because of the soul-bearing and the truth-telling we had done with each other, she became more unapologetically herself with everyone. She said things she'd always needed to say. She did things she always wanted to do. The same happened for me. I became braver about being authentic with the people in my life. I said my truths, but more important than that, I sought the truth of others. It wasn't until the final chapter of this story that I realized just how well midwifery had trained me. After that best year of my sister's life, the cancer came roaring back. And this time there was nothing more the doctors could do. They gave her just a couple of months to live. The night before my sister died, I sat by her bedside. She was so small and thin. I could see the blood pulsing in her neck. It was my blood, her blood, our blood. When she died, part of me would die too. I tried to make sense of it all, how becoming one with each other had made us more ourselves, our soul selves, and how by facing and opening to the pain of our past, we'd finally been delivered to each other, and how by stepping out of time, we would now be connected forever. My sister left me with so many things, and I'm going to leave you now with just one of them. You don't have to wait for a life or death situation to clean up the relationships that matter to you, to offer the marrow of your soul, and to seek it in another. We can all do this. We can be like a new kind of first responder, like the one to take the first courageous step toward the other, and to do something or to try to do something other than rejection or attack. We can do this with our siblings and our mates and our friends and our colleagues. We can do this with the disconnection and the discord all around us. We can do this for the soul of the world. Thank you.
I know that I speak for you in thanking Elizabeth and all the speakers in this first session of TED Women. Mind-expanding and emotionally powerful talks that they have shared with us and ideas that they have given us about time.
It sure has been. So before we take a break, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm pretty curious about that poll we took at the beginning of the session. Do we control time, or does time control us? Let's find out. Okay. It looks like
it's a little dark. Time controls us. But the good news is it was pretty close, so I feel optimistic. In just a second, we're going to give you a few details about the break. Let's say goodbye now to those of you watching via TEDx events all around the world. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
¿Están de acuerdo conmigo con que la mejor forma de iniciar este evento fue conectándonos con la que es la casa y la cuna de TED Women? Que esas ideas inspiradoras que acabamos de ver nos dejan a todos emocionados, sensibles y completamente preparados para empezar a conocer las ideas locales. De nuevo, eso fue lo que ocurrió allá. Lo compartimos con ustedes para entrar en un momento de emoción muy especial, para que esta celebración global se sienta también acá en Bogotá, para que se sienta en Colombia, para que la vivan los amigos que nos están siguiendo en streaming y adicionalmente para que demos ese compás para oír a nuestros grandes oradores. Vamos a tomar un descanso justo y necesario para poder oír nuestras ideas locales. Prepárense, nos faltan 12 charlas, nos faltan 12 ideas transformadoras, así que esta jornada apenas está empezando.